Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're going to jump right into the fascinating and sometimes complicated world of language, especially in a society that is as wonderfully multilingual as India's.
So, let's start with this. This was said by a 6-year-old kid in Chennai. He's just telling someone what he had for breakfast. But listen to what he's doing there. In a single breath, he's mixing his native Malayalam with English. I mean, this is how people actually talk every single day.
Okay, so, to someone who's a real stickler for grammar, this sentence might just sound wrong, like a messy jumble of languages. But is it really a mistake? Or is it a perfect example of how language works in the real world? Let's unpack that.
To really get to the bottom of that question, we gotta zoom out and look at the bigger picture. You see, India isn't just a country that has a lot of languages. It's a society that's literally built on multilingualism. It's our default setting, not some special add-on. And just look at this. This chart gives you a sense of the sheer scale of it all. We're talking about at least 5 major language families. Think of them like 5 giant ancient trees, and each one has dozens and dozens of branches, which are all the different languages we speak. This amazing mix is the very fabric of our society.
So what happens when people from all these different language backgrounds live and work together? Well, their languages inevitably start to mingle. You have to think of languages not as rigid rulebooks, but like living, breathing things. They're like sponges, just constantly soaking up words, phrases, and even grammar from one another.
And this constant mixing leads to some really fascinating habits. A perfect example is something called reduplication. You know how in many Indian languages, we repeat a word to add emphasis, like garam garam chai for really hot tea? Well, we carry that right over into our English. We say things like, let's go slowly, slowly. It's a perfect example of how we adapt a language to fit the way we communicate.
But here's where things get a little complicated. There's this huge disconnect, right, between this fluid, multilingual world we actually live in and the very rigid expectations we often find inside a classroom. It's a classic showdown, society versus school.
So, on one side of this, you have educators who totally embrace this reality. This principal, for example, sees these language differences not as a problem that needs to be fixed, but as a fantastic chance for students to learn from each other.
But then on the other hand, there's this very common, very powerful view that English is the only ticket to success in this competitive world. And this creates an enormous amount of pressure.
So here's the real tension. Our society thrives on using many languages, but our schools often push for just one, an English-only standard. And what that does is it treats a child's mother tongue not as an asset, but as something to be overcome.
Now, this conflict is often fueled by some really powerful myths about how our brains actually learn languages. So you know what? Let's go ahead and debunk 3 of the biggest ones.
First up, the big one. The idea that there's some kind of magic window in childhood, and if you don't start learning English then, you've pretty much missed your chance.
But the science tells a totally different story. Sure, kids are great at picking up accents, but what truly matters is the quality of the language you're exposed to, not how old you are. A motivated adult with access to great learning materials can often learn way more efficiently than a child with poor input. It's about the what, not just the when.
Next up, a fear that so many parents have, that if their child speaks their mother tongue at home, it's going to confuse them and get in the way of learning English properly.
The reality is actually the complete opposite. Having a strong foundation in your mother tongue is like having a blueprint for language itself. Your brain already understands grammar, sentence structure, and how to tell a story. This makes it easier, not harder, to build a new language on top of that solid foundation. And finally, we have the myth of monolingualism. This is the idea that to learn English perfectly, you have to completely immerse yourself in it and avoid all other languages so you don't get confused. The truth is, the human brain is a multilingual machine by design. It's built to handle multiple language systems at once. Being multilingual isn't a bug that causes confusion, it's a powerful feature that actually boosts your cognitive flexibility and your problem-solving skills. So what happens when all these multilingual brains, shaped by this incredibly diverse environment, adopt a language like English? Well, they don't just learn it, they transform it, they make it their own. And that's really the story of how Indian English was born. A key reason English really took root in India is that it was seen as neutral territory. It didn't belong to any one regional group, so it could act as a common link language without playing favorites. Plus, it was incredibly adaptable. It easily absorbed local words and flavors, unlike some of the more rigid classical languages.
And this whole process of adaptation created a distinct dialect with its own consistent rules. We already talked about reduplication, but then there are the sounds, like that hard T sound we use in a word like table, which comes directly from our native languages. And of course, there are unique grammatical structures, like how we sometimes flip the word order around in questions.
A perfect example of this is the tag question. When we end a sentence with no, like in, "It was good, no?" we're directly translating a pattern from many Indian languages, like the Hindi phrase, "Acha hai, na?" That little na finds its English equivalent in our no. So, let's bring this all back home. What's the ultimate takeaway here? What does all this mean for that 6-year-old boy in Chennai? And maybe more importantly, what does it mean for you?
Here's the most important thing to remember. Indian English is not bad English. It is not a random collection of mistakes. It's a valid, rule-governed dialect in its own right. When millions and millions of people share a way of speaking, that's not a mistake. That's the birth of a new standard.
Now, does that mean you can't improve? Of course not. But there are no shortcuts or magic tricks. There's only one undebatable mantra for getting better at any language. The more high-quality input you get, through reading, listening, and engaging with it, the better your output is going to be.
So, the next time you feel that little pang of insecurity about your accent or your grammar, I want you to reframe the question. Instead of asking, "Is my English correct?" I want you to ask, "What story does my English tell?" Because it tells a powerful one. It's a story not of error, but of adaptation. It's a story of a language that has been woven into the fabric of a dynamic, multilingual world. And that's not just your linguistic identity. That's your linguistic superpower.